Hello everyone, and welcome to the Darkest Hour. I'm your host, Amanda Jane. If you spend any time watching the news, you know that media outlets bombard us with stories of real-life human predators. We want to be aware of those in our communities who mean harm. We know to be afraid of people, the things they're capable of. So I guess the news has helped with that, which makes it easy to believe that we have a firm grasp on what to fear. We lock our doors, avoid unfamiliar faces, trust our instincts to protect ourselves. But what about the other entities lurking in the shadows? The voices of the invisible that fill the halls of otherwise empty homes. The things that defy human understanding. A being with glowing eyes and an otherworldly presence. Is there a paranormal predator skulking, or is it a trick of the mind? Speaking of tricks of the mind, that's an interesting one too. In most cases, we can trust our minds. They're the very things that help us out of or through these terrifying situations. But what happens when you can't trust yourself? Or worse, you don't recognize yourself. You find that you're in a whole different kind of horror story. The kind where you struggle to even remember who you are. Tonight's stories explore the various realms of fear that we're exposed to as humans. Some offering advice on how to avoid an experience yourself, unless of course you're looking for one. Though, might I suggest listening first and deciding later? I think it's wise to. So, let's get started, shall we? I'm sure a lot of kids, or at least some kids, found their grandparents' house a little creepy. Am I reaching? I could be, but I'll tell you about my grandparents' house and my experience there, which involved my sister, my cousins. So that makes at least 3 people I know, myself and them, who share my feelings about a creepy grandparents' house. First things first, my grandparents, Nonnie and Poppy, were very old. Their home was very old. They were lovely, even throughout their passing, which was less than a month apart from one another. Rest in peace to both of them. So they were very loved. Their home was a source of a lot of great family memories, but it was haunted. And because it was haunted, or because something within that home was charged, as Aunt Peg used to say, it houses some other memories too. My parents would often drop us off with them for a weekend or two throughout the year, and in the summertime, me, my sister, and my cousins would stay for a couple of weeks. The first time I ever experienced something, and every time since, was while staying in our mom's old room. It was in the back right corner of their Rambler-style home, Aunt Peg's old room across the hall. I was young, but I know my sister and I were both in school, so couldn't have been younger than 7 at the time. It was just the 2 of us this time, and I'd been having trouble falling asleep, while my sister seemed to pass out instantly. Mom's room now had the old TV from the living room in it, as our parents bought them a new fancy one for Christmas. I'd always liked falling asleep with the TV on at home, so here it was no different, a welcome change. I was familiar enough with the TV that I knew I didn't have a remote for it. I was stuck changing the channels from the knob, same with turning it on or off. I'd picked a channel which connected to the VHS. Since Lion King was already in there, I remember just letting it play. I hadn't fallen asleep, not even close, but I was back in my bunk when I heard the TV shut off. Not only was it the obvious sound of something playing and the familiar buzz of the TV ceasing completely, but the glow from the TV was gone. Had it not been for the hallway light, I would have been in total darkness. It wasn't the TV turning off that scared me, not really. But as I laid there trying to figure out if I was going to turn it back on, something caught my attention. The light from the hallway quickly cut out, as if someone had penetrated the doorway just for a moment. By the time I focused on the doorway, there was nothing there. Sitting up, though, I investigated further by looking around the whole room. I had the top bunk in this sleeping arrangement while my sister slept in the bottom. As I started to look around the room, I thought I saw nothing of real concern. And then I got to the TV. It was still off, housing the reflection of the entire room, but something wasn't right. I could see on the TV that everything was where it should be, everything except for the shadow being standing underneath my bed. I didn't realize how afraid I should be, so I took my gaze away to pop my head down and look at my sister's bed. She was sleeping soundly, and there was no shadow. Still, looking back up at the TV, there it was, a shadow that didn't belong. I decided I didn't need the TV, and I tried to ignore it, turning towards the wall and closing my eyes in an attempt to fall asleep. Only moments later, I hear the sound of the TV being turned on. It's startling, and I jolt up to confirm it's been turned on. It wasn't on a channel, though. It was just a fuzzy static screen, but the static was getting louder. I was going to have to leave my bed and handle the TV, but I felt so frozen. Almost sure I wouldn't be able to do it, but I had to. The sound was going to wake up the whole house. I jumped down the ladder, feet hit the floor, and the TV turned off. I look up at the TV, and there's a shadow just behind my right shoulder. I can't hear anything or feel anything, but the image alone makes me want to scream. I consider swinging around, punching and kicking, but what if this time it was my sister? Instead, I spun around, fully expecting the shadow to not be there, just like last time. Only this time, it was there. An endless black mass, about as tall as me. No eyes, no face, no distinguishable features at all. Before I could even scream, it suddenly passed through me, leaving my chest with an intense, cold pain. It felt like my torso was experiencing brain freeze. It hurt, but only for a moment. As much as I wanted to turn on the lights, the ladder was closer. I jumped up, dove under the covers. I had no idea what had just shot through my body, but I felt like I couldn't breathe. I don't think I got more than a couple of hours of sleep. It was this odd in and out of sleep, and it kept me exhausted, like when I had the flu. I remember the next morning being afraid to tell anyone about what I had seen. I kept the image to myself, and intentionally slept in the living room that night after my grandparents retreated to bed. I almost felt sorry for leaving my sister in the room, but she didn't really seem to have been bothered the same way I was bothered, so I reasoned with myself that it was okay. Suddenly, I heard screaming. It was coming from my mom's old room, and it was my sister. I wasn't the first one awoken by her screams. I saw Nani walking toward the room. She didn't even see me on the couch. I contemplated just staying where I was. Somehow I knew it was going to be the figure on the TV. My sister was crying, screaming. Then she started calling for me to come help her. I was forced to move, and I ran into the room. My sister was sitting outside of her bed, on the floor, full of tears, crying about a shadow that woke her up by touching her face. She said that she called for me. I don't even think that Nani knew what my sister was talking about. She continued to try to console her into a less amped up state. Once my sister calmed down, I started to crawl into the top bunk, took my position there. Clearly, I couldn't just leave her again. And that was that. An event my little sister barely remembers, but I remember it super clearly. The next time I encountered this figure was in the same room, less than a year later, as it would have been the summer versus the holidays. Our cousins were there, staying in Aunt Peg's old room. Since my cousin Chelle B and I are around the same age, we made our younger siblings sleep together in Aunt Peg's room, while we took over Mom's old room with the TV. Most of the night we were playing card games and any board games that we could find for 2 players. But eventually, we'd have to go to sleep. And I hadn't forgotten about the last time I was there. But somehow, I felt more brave or maybe safe with Chelle B being there. Only thing was, Chelle B wanted the top bunk, which would put me on the bottom. I didn't want to seem like a wuss, so I agreed. I almost made it a full night without getting scared. I kept telling myself that I wouldn't experience the same thing twice, because it was probably a nightmare. Technically, I didn't experience the same thing, but I saw the shadow. I don't know what woke me up exactly, but I suspect it was the TV turning off. Or I suspect it was something similar that happened to my sister. I was suddenly awakened, and I could see a dark shadow, and a piece of its shadowy self reaching towards my face, but I didn't feel like screaming. I just felt like being perfectly still, but I must have made some sort of noise as I heard Chelle B whisper my name from the top bunk. Remembering the last time, how I'd said nothing, how I'd turned to face it. I didn't want the same thing to happen to me, but I didn't know how to prevent it. So I just called back up to her, and it felt good to use my voice, but it felt bad that this shadow was still above me. It's like I couldn't even focus on what else she was saying, because this all-consuming energy, it was over me, and I was freezing. Without moving, I watched as Chelle B jump down the ladder in a familiar routine, but she ran for the light. The shadow either disappeared just before or just as she switched the light on. But Chelle B had seen it. She basically had my exact experience from the first, except she was smart enough to just run away from the shadow instead of facing it. With the lights on, Chelle B came running back towards my bunk. She was almost crying as she tried to tell me what she'd seen. I asked her before she could even get the words out, "Did you see the shadow?" Her eyes widened. She shook her head. Even though I'd been really scared, I felt like I needed to help Chelle B because she seemed more scared. I told her it was okay. We decided to sleep on the floor of Aunt Peg's old room. The next morning, I didn't plan on saying anything, but Chelle B was adamant, grilling Nani and Poppy the next morning. As she recounted her experience, I could see my little sister start to remember her own experience, but I watched it leave her face too. I backed Chelle B up by saying that I'd seen the shadow. I told them all I'd seen it twice. Poppy laughed, which he did that a lot, saying that us kids sure had an imagination on us. Chelle B squealed in frustration, stamped her feet, and declared that she wouldn't be staying in that room anymore. The rest of the week, the kids piled in one room, and oddly enough, no more shadows. These types of events would repeat themselves through the years, but as I got older, the shadow became less visible, so much so to the point where it was easy to dismiss it as a trick of the light, though truthfully, I never believed it to be a trick of the light. Instead, I was just happy that it was fleeting and short-lived. The reality is, when you experience something like this, I don't think it's as easy to dismiss anything anymore, and you're just destined to be a believer. Though I haven't seen the shadow since I was a child, the fact that it was there never left me. I'll try to convince my cousin to share her own experiences with the shadow, but even as adults, Chelle B really doesn't like talking about it. These stories were told to me and my siblings by our dad. Me and my twin were 11 or 12 at the time, so I'll be going off memory. Anyway, my dad was a wild card when he was young, and he thought that a spooky graveyard was the ideal date spot like most people back in those days. The Bull's Lament. There was once a farmer who had a prized bull in life. The farmer loved the bull so much that when he died, he wanted the bull to be killed and buried beside him. He also wanted a monument of the proud bull placed over their graves to watch over them for all eternity. Most folk during that time thought the farmer was crazed for thinking such a wish, yet that didn't stop them from honoring his wish. When the farmer passed, the bull was put down and placed right beside him. The monument was then placed over them, just as the farmer wished. I'm not sure how many years went by until my dad's experience, so I apologize for not having any idea when it happened, possibly when he was in his early to mid-20s. My dad liked to hang out in the nearby graveyard with several of his friends. It was like their own playground where they could just play army men and pranks. One night in particular, he and one of my uncles were just relaxing until they heard it. The sound of a bull crying out, either in anger or anguish. They looked at one another and decided to see where it came from. They followed the noise to the monument, only to find nothing. It was then that they heard the bull roar somewhere nearby, before the sound of charging hooves running towards them. Dad said they ran the hell out of the graveyard and back to their car. The man in a top hat and cape. Another story my dad told me happened when he and one of my uncles took their dates to the graveyard. They parked their car in one of the turnoffs and proceeded to make their own lover's lane. Things were getting serious when one of their dates noticed a green fog begin surrounding their car. All four of them sat frozen, watching the mist grow even further in thickness. Soon, they began to hear strange thuds striking the car. It was then that Dad decided to turn the key and get out of there as soon as possible. He was then surprised to find a man dressed in a top hat and a cape standing directly in front of their car, smiling at them. The thudding on the car began to become even worse, scaring their dates. Dad hit the gas pedal and drove forward directly toward the man, hoping that he would move out of the way. Instead of moving, the man stood still, allowing the car to drive through him. Dad stopped the car some distance past where the man had stood and looked through the back window. To his surprise, he saw the man still standing there, unharmed with the same grin. The man began to gesture for Dad to try again, but Dad decided to just drive out of there for several miles in silence. As I said, I was either 11 or 12, so I'm going off of memory. I don't remember the name of the cemetery, but I do remember being told many other experiences from what happened, aside from these two stories. I'll have to share those next. I got into a lift car, like I had numerous times before. After the car started moving, I noticed the driver turned in the wrong direction, but thought that he was just going to take an alternate route. Quickly, I saw that this wasn't the case, and I spoke up. "Excuse me, I think you're going the wrong way," he replied. "Oh, really? Sorry, my GPS is messed up." He poked around at the smartphone attached to his dashboard, which I noticed was now off. That's when the "oh shit, this is how you die" feeling kicked in. I was sitting in the passenger seat, so I tried to act calm and discreet as I reached into my bag to make sure my phone and keys were in reach. Nonchalantly as possible, I said, "Oh, no problem. Just make a right here and take Main Street back towards Pleasant City." He argued with me briefly, but then turned in the right direction. I sighed with relief. Maybe the danger was all in my head. Then he spoke up again. He seemed like a decent, morally upright young woman. "Sammy, can I ask you for some advice about a problem I have?" I stiffened in my seat, but nodded. What else was there to say? He proceeded to tell me about a relative he was quote-unquote worried about, who was involved in prostitution. This quote-unquote bitch needed his help, and all he wanted in the world was to quote-unquote save her. But she refused to tell him her address. Shocker, I know. If only I had her address. I don't care what she says, I'd go there and kidnap her for her own good. The driver proceeded to get more and more worked up, cursing and yelling, while exit strategies were rushing through my head. You know what the problem is? This bitch is fucking possessed by Satan. It's the only explanation, not like you. You can tell from looking at a woman if they're morally upright or not. He looked meaningfully at me, while I shrunk inwardly, glad at least that moment that there was no sign on my head reading proud sex worker, which I am. Fixing his gaze directly at me while still driving, he posed a question. I felt at that moment that my response would determine his next course of action. Sammy, is it so wrong for me to want to help this girl? Should I just say, fuck it, and let someone I love ruin her life? Or should I keep trying even though she keeps telling me to get out of her life? I wanted to tell him he was being a psycho, and it was obvious why she didn't want his help. But instead, I said something like, it's really, really good that you care so much about her. That's not wrong. But you can't help anyone that doesn't want it. That's not your fault. I don't know if he could tell, but I was trembling. By this point, he was very close to my home. He seemed to calm down, but I'd had the distinct feeling that I'd narrowly avoided disaster. As he pulled up to my place, he said without a smile, "You're a smart girl, Sammy. I'll think on your advice." I got the fuck out of that car and went inside, very relieved to be home, but also cursing myself for using my home address. For that reason, I was afraid to even leave any kind of feedback. I deleted Lyft and never heard from him again. I lived in an apartment in this old house in New Orleans. I lived with my boyfriend at the time, and we got this insane deal on a beautiful apartment. It was $600 to rent a massive, stunning apartment with hardwood floors and huge ceilings. My boyfriend worked in the oil field and would go offshore often, leaving me alone. 99% of the things happened when I was alone. One day I got out of the shower and the mirror was fogged up. I leaned over while I was brushing my teeth, and when I looked up, the mirror had been wiped in a circle where my face was. That happened a few times. It had wiped away where my face was when I looked up from brushing my teeth. Only a handful of times for the few months that I lived there, but when it did happen, it happened the same way every time. While I was sleeping, I often heard things crashing, and also often heard footsteps in the attic. When my boyfriend was there, he heard the footsteps too. He went into the attic to check it out, and no one was up there. I came home from getting groceries, put them on the gas stove, got a feeling of being watched, and looked up. After 2 or 3 seconds of me coming in and putting the groceries down, I looked up and all the cabinets were suddenly open 90 degrees. I closed the doors and tried to recreate it happening, which I couldn't. I brushed it off, went back to put the groceries away, got another creepy feeling, looked up and all of the cabinet doors were open again at a perfect 90-degree angle. While my back was turned, looking at the cabinets, all of the burners turned on full blast. When he was home, every night we heard footsteps of someone walking slowly in high heels up and down the hallway, sometimes for hours. The apartment next to us was a mirror image of ours, and the walls were thin. My boyfriend thought that the guy next to us had a lady over, and I said, "No woman wears high heels on hardwood floors, walking back and forth all night. They would have taken them off." Well, it turns out our neighbor worked as a nurse during the night shift and wasn't home anyway. I was going to sleep one day, but I was scared, so I left the hallway light on. I heard footsteps and was too scared to sleep. I looked up and saw an evil being. A man. But he looked half something else. Something was wrong. I saw him walk into the doorway of the room, stop, and turn towards me. I'd never been so scared. I was paralyzed in fear. He came into the room, stood at the left side of the bed, and sat down. I felt like I was being electrocuted the entire time he was looking at me. It felt like an eternity. I think I passed out from fear. I woke up in the morning and panicked. I felt like it happened, but kept trying to convince myself that it was just a nightmare. One night, my boyfriend and I were watching TV in the dark. We heard the sound of the wood floor creaking, and we both looked over to see an evil-looking, older, ugly woman glaring at us. We both looked at each other. I knew by looking at him, he saw it too. That was the day that I went from thinking I was paranoid to living in full fear. And for me, here's the most terrifying part. Our dishwasher broke and these handymen came to install the new one. One guy says to the other, "Hurry up, I hate being in this apartment." I asked him to explain why, and he said he'll only talk to me outside. He said that a serial killer lived in that apartment and had killed women who were all the same age who looked similar in the French Quarter. He was a cross-dresser and walked up and down the hallway in heels. The FBI found a headless body and searched the entire property for the head and never found it. They looked in the attic and found traces of him living up there at some point. If you're curious, 2835 General Pershing, New Orleans, Louisiana. It's the upper right side apartment. I tried to look up the news story online and haven't had any luck. Maybe someone here is a better sleuth. There I was, sitting in a strange house I'd never seen before, sitting awfully close to a guy whose name I was sure I didn't know, trying to figure out how to read the word Player 2 at the top of the Battleship game on this stranger's phone. Now let's rewind an hour and also provide some backstory. I live in Southern California, but had traveled to Connecticut with my boyfriend for his close friend's wedding. The last night that we were in town, we decided to drive to Massachusetts, a state I had never been, to visit another good friend of his. Everything was going well that evening. Good food, good people, good conversation. Sometime late in the night, after most people had left and gone to bed, I'd quickly jumped back into a big comfy chair, completely forgetting that said chair was sitting right beneath a wooden staircase banister, at perfect back of the noggin level. While animatedly jumping into my seat, I also apparently very animatedly slammed the back of my skull into said wooden overhang. My boyfriend freaked out, jumped up, grabbed my head while his friend sat across from me, with the most stunned look on his face, yelling, "Are you okay?" Now, it's important to note that I have an incurable disease that causes chronic severe pain, so my pain tolerance is pretty high. I thought they were being dramatic, and I brushed them off. After all, I wasn't really in any pain, and the only thing startling was the sound of my hard skull making contact with the hard wood. I assure the guys I'm fine, and we continue on in our conversation about virtual reality and the potential future for virtual reality, and I forget all about my little bump. Now, at this point, I've been traveling for a week. I'm exhausted, and it's late at night, so things often get fuzzy for me when that happens. During the course of our conversation, I remember having some really good arguments in regards to the possibilities of future AI reality. In the beginning of the conversation, I was really getting my point across to the guys. But at some time during the course of an hour, I began having trouble expressing my thoughts. And our friend even pointed out that he thought that I was confused about what I was explaining at one point. Okay, no big deal. It's super late and I should probably be getting to bed anyway. Our friend sees himself to bed, so now it's just my boyfriend and myself hanging out. Let's go to bed. I'm really, really tired and out of it, I say to my boyfriend. How about we play a game of Battleship on my phone first, he says while looking at me slightly leery. I was really exhausted and knew that we had a plane to catch the next day, but Battleship was a special thing between us and I couldn't really say no to one game, could I? So we're playing Battleship and I'm winning. What? I never win this game. The screen switches seamlessly at the top from player 1 to player 2. I begin having trouble remembering which player I was. Oh right, I'm player 2, I thought to myself. Man, I'm really tired and out of it. As the game goes on, I realize I'm having trouble really reading the word player 2, but again, I brush it off. Then, I won the game. Oh my God, I won! I never win! I scream in excitement at the guy sitting next to me. Wait, the guy sitting next to me. Who is this guy sitting next to me? He looks familiar, but I just can't remember his name or place where I know him from. Wait, this house doesn't seem familiar either. Okay, that's okay. We must be on a first date at his house. Just play it cool, and if you don't remember his name in a minute, just politely ask him to tell you again. It's just not coming to me. I turn, smile sweetly, and say, I'm very sorry, but I can't really remember your name. You know when people say the color drained from someone's face? Well, the color drained from his face, and a look of shock and confusion replaced it. This is a joke, right? You're kidding me right now, he desperately asked. You know my name. I'm your boyfriend, Glenn. So there I sit, fairly calmly and quietly, while trying to remember his name was Glenn, and he was my boyfriend. While assuring him I was fine and just out of it and joking. I was just out of it and joking, right? Right? Just then he gets a call and leaves the room for a minute. I hear him on the phone, and I'm sitting on the couch and just trying desperately to remember whose house I'm in. What was that guy's name again? I already forgot. Did he drug me? This must be a first date and he drugged me. Okay, play it cool and you'll find a way to get out of here and you'll be safe, I think to myself, starting to panic a bit. Just then, he walks back into the room. I look at him and realize he's a total stranger. He looks back at me with a worried look, still on the phone, and rushes over to the couch to sit next to me. I'm so sorry. I really can't remember your name, I say again. The fear returns to his face. Well, what's your name? He asked me. My name? What is my name? Erin. You're Erin. Erin Ramona, he says, more than a little upset. Where are we right now? He continues. Okay, yes, I have definitely been drugged. Who is this guy I'm with? What house am I in? How did I get here? He's holding my hand when I look up and feel that ever-familiar burn of tears filling my eyes while I gulp in a panicked breath and finally admit out loud. Again, I'm so sorry, but I think something is really, really wrong. Okay, full-blown panic mode. I said it calmly, but my shaking hand in his has definitely betrayed my calm exterior. Babe, you hit your head, and I think we need to take you right to the hospital. Now, remember how before this, when I hit my head, we were in the midst of a very deep conversation on virtual reality? Oh my God, I knew what was wrong. I was in a virtual reality simulation, and I've completely gone off my rocker. I'm having a psychotic break, and that's why I don't remember who I am. Okay, it's okay. You can cry and shake a little, but don't tell this strange guy you're with that you're having a mental breakdown. That's not a good idea. Just play it cool and play it off and do some breathing exercises because you're really losing your mind. The brain does funny things when it's injured and swollen tight, pressing hard against your skull. After asking Glenn the same round of questions 5 times in a row where I could only tell you my name because he had told me, And he didn't tell me my middle name, so who knew what that was? He decided to wake up his friends, who I also did not recognize, who also answered my same round of questioning and some way, somehow, convinced me to go to the hospital with only slight resistance. Again, I was convinced I was having a nervous breakdown, and I didn't want to embarrass myself at the hospital for a silly little anxiety attack. But okay, fine, I'll go. So they helped me get dressed, put on my shoes, and into the car we go. Oh shit, I'm being kidnapped. Stay calm. We arrive at the hospital. I still don't know who I am or where I am, or really even who this guy is. He seemed trustworthy, and I thought I knew him, but I still couldn't place him. Oh no, he's crying. He's hurt. I'm crying. What's happening? Forgetting the entire situation all over again, I drew the conclusion that something was wrong with him and that we were at the hospital to get help for him. Why was no one helping him? Silly me. Ouch, oh my God, my head is throbbing. I think as I'm sitting in the waiting room, watching this strange guy fill paperwork out, still trying to wrap my head around, well, everything. And here's this guy, who I'm sure I know, but I can't really figure it out. Red-eyed, filled with fear, tears streaming down his face, just holding my hand and telling me it's going to be all right. Okay, so maybe he didn't drug me. Maybe I am safe. Please keep holding my hand and don't let go. I cry to him. I don't know you or know what's happening, but your hand is the only thing that makes me feel safe right now. I'm not leaving your side, Erin. I'm not leaving your side ever. I'll take care of you. He says so compassionately and sincerely, with the tears streaming and the worry still written all over his face. A few brain scans and several very confused hours later, in a very terrible, incompetent hospital with what may have been some small repeated seizures, a constant cycle of fear and questions of who are you, where am I, and I think something is really, really wrong, and many, many hours, I was starting to somewhat consistently remember that my name was Erin. I was 34. I was on vacation in Massachusetts when I hit my head, sustaining a severe concussion and subsequently losing all my memory. Both my mother and my boyfriend have lived through very, very severe, life-threatening brain bleeds. My boyfriend's requiring a craniotomy, so when I hit my head and slowly lost all memory, my boyfriend feared the worst and was worried that I had a brain bleed and could be having a stroke. I can't even imagine the fear and pain that he was experiencing, watching the girl he loved forget everything she knew. I learned a few things that day and the days following as I started to regain my memory. 1. Brain injuries are hard, really hard. Losing all memory of your entire life is even harder. And the headaches? Oh Lord, the headaches. The dizziness, the blurred vision in my right eye from all the pressure, the weakness in my knees that wouldn't let me stand, and the nausea. Holy moly, recovering from a brain injury is hard. Remembering your life all over again is kind of cool though. Wait, I drive my dream truck? Are these super cool tie-dye vans mine? I have long hair. Oh my God, I have beautiful long hair. Seeing yourself in a mirror after you lose your memory is a very, very weird experience. Flying on a plane 3 days post-severe concussion is a very painful, hard, dizzying experience, made even worse by the fact that I couldn't sleep on the plane, wasn't allowed to read books or play on my phone. Basically, I just had to sit and wait it out, feeling like I was going to barf the entire contents of my stomach on the plane, and also faint simultaneously. Sustaining a brain injury while 3,000 miles away from home with a guy that you've only dated for a few months, who doesn't leave your side for a second, takes care of you for days on end, bringing you endless glasses of icy, icy water, my favorite. holding your hand pretty much every second of the day to keep you somewhat grounded in reality, rubbing your back while you're crying and your body shakes uncontrollably. That, my friends, is love. And that man is what you'd call a keeper. Nothing like a serious medical scare to solidify a newish relationship. Several months and unfortunately several hospital visits later, I'm still in love with this guy more than ever, and I know that I'm so very lucky to have him in my life. I know this isn't a traditional scary story, but this was the scariest thing that's ever happened to me. Well, friends, it appears we've reached the end of tonight's episode. Thanks for joining me. Whether it's your first time or you're a regular, your support means the world over here. We've got brand new episodes every Friday night. Keep those eyes open long enough for those deep sleep videos. And of course, double features. Subscribe, tap the bell, and you'll never miss a thing. Big thanks to those who shared their stories, and a huge shout out to all of our patrons, whom I appreciate so very much. Tracy S, Tamara K, Monica L, ZoeWatt, Chelle B, Donald C, The Dark Cosmos, Marion T, Rat Girl, Alisha S, Erin G, Nikki H, Mr. Revenant, Naz K, Brendon G, Paul T, Nicholas C, Lissane, Arlene F, and Adrienne. If you want to support the Darkest Hour in other ways, consider joining my Patreon. Check out patreon.com/thedarkesthour. Or click the link in the description to learn more. Do you have stories like these? I'd love to share them. Send them to me, amandadarkesthour@gmail.com, or on the Darkest Hour subreddit, The Darkest Hour YT. Stay spooky.